the offensive line, defensive line. That's where this team has some depth. Is that fair to say?
Oh, for sure. So I would say that at the skill positions, they're not deep. Like a quarterback, running back, they're reasonably deep. But quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, not deep. Linebacker, cornerback, safety, scary, not deep.
Mag guys here on Birds 365. John McMullen, Jody McDonald, giving you Eagles insight for the next hour and change before John McMullen goes down to the Eagle gathering. He likes my terminology there. We'll see if Jimmy Kempski does too. Little practice time, and then media availability. So we'll get even more Birds info out there for you today. We're getting info and opinion coming your way. We know McMullen's got a following of his own. They call it the McMullen Mafia. Well, us South Jersey guys stick together as well. Joining me next is part of the Marlton Mafia. My hometown, his former hometown. Jimmy Kempski of PhillyBoys.com hops on board with us. How are you, JK?
Current hometown, too. Currently in Marlton, yes.
Why did I think you ski-daddled a couple towns over? My bad.
I did ski-daddle, and then 20 years later, I came back. So here I
am. To your roots. So we're going to get into your roots with the Philadelphia Eagles. McMullen told me I basically have to go here first. Are the Eagles coaching staff telling you the same thing they're telling him, that they need to improve in the slot position this year, that Greg Ward, while a nice player, isn't quite good enough, and they think they can be better there?
Yeah, I mean, you look at his yards per catch average since he's been with the Eagles here. I think it's under 8. It's definitely under 10. Like he's totally non-threatening in terms of like a down the field receiver, and then also in terms of getting yards after the catch. So yeah, I think that's a low bar in terms of being able to upgrade that position. I'm actually a little bit surprised that they did. Well, I guess maybe not totally surprised after taking a player like Devontae Smith in the first round. I thought that this draft in particular was just loaded with slot receiver talent, and they had 10 picks heading into that draft. So I was mildly surprised that they didn't, take a slot receiver later in the draft. But yeah, I mean, for sure, they can do better at that spot. And there are some options that the Eagles have, and some of these younger players, like they could go with maybe a bigger slot in Travis Fulgham. They could go with maybe one of these speed guys. I don't think Hightower is a good fit for the slot, but maybe like a Quez Watkins could slot in there and maybe be more of a playmaking threat than a guy like Greg Ward. But I'm on the same page with John in that they can certainly do better there.
Yeah, I don't know, Jimmy. Jody thinks I'm lying to him.
I'm not lying. I just think you're both wrong.
Okay.
I think Greg Ward is having a bust-out year, and that, yes, I will put it on the quarterback and the system last year as to why his average yards per catch was under 8.
Well, I would argue that Jimmy and I aren't wrong. Now, this is mainly the old coaching staff, so maybe they're wrong, but we're just telling you what the Eagles want to get better at that position. I think that's a fair. Doesn't mean they can.
I think they can with a guy named Greg Ward. I think he can be better for them this year at that position and put up better numbers, which included leading the team in touchdown receptions last year, in case we're just checking all the stats that Greg Ward did or didn't put up last year.
But this is a team that hasn't had a 600-yard receiver in 2 years. I mean, they got to get better. Is that fair to say? Jimmy's doing his series about depth on this team. Would you say this is a deep team at the wide receiver position?
Oh, God, no. I mean, they barely even have starters, really. I mean, everyone is a projection. Every single one of these players, even Devontae Smith, like, I think he's going to be really good in the league, but he's a rookie. He's a projection. Jalen Reagor hasn't proven anything yet. He's your number 2 receiver right now, and then there's the debate over who's going to be this. I will say this for Greg Ward. At least he caught the football, which is more than you can say for other receivers in the past few years. But, yeah, I think depth at that wide receiver position. I mean, first of all, they don't, again, just the starters alone are question marks, and then you get past those guys, and it gets even dicier.
Yeah, maybe I'm an old school guy that I look at what guys have actually accomplished. And Greg Ward has accomplished something as compared to other guys in the wide receiver room right now, which lends me to a question about a guy who did accomplish something last year, as short-lived as it was, and that was Travis Fulgham. For about a 4 or 5 week period, he was easily the best Eagles wide receiver, and he was almost the norm of good starting wide receivers in the National Football League, which Eagles haven't had many of those runs. And then toward the end of the year, he kind of disappeared. Again, do we blame Travis Fulgham? Do we blame Doug Peterson in the offensive play calling? Do we put it on the quarterbacks? Because that would include both Carson Wentz and the current quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Where did Fulgham come from? And then where did he go to, Jimmy Kempski?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of that question, I mean, he was a late addition to training camp, and I thought he actually played pretty well during the backstretch of training camp. I was like, oh, this guy's going to stick at least on the practice squad. And then he did. They called him up, and yeah, I mean, he had that 5-game stretch that you're talking about, where I believe he led the NFL in receiving during that specific 5-game stretch, and then he kind of disappeared. And I don't know if what happened on his part. My understanding is like he wasn't a great practice player. That sort of trickled out a little bit, but I think even more so, there was the asinine decision to reinsert Alshon Jeffrey back into the lineup when Fulgham was a young player. Their season was already not going well. Get the young player as many snaps as he can get. Who cares if Alshon Jeffrey's back? Don't put him. Don't take away snaps from Travis Fulgham to get Alshon Jeffrey back in the lineup. So I think that affected or sort of stalled Travis Fulgham's progress during the 2020 season.
Yeah, it's difficult for coaches. I think, Jimmy, you realize that they tend to default to veteran guys that they're comfortable with, and they do at least understand how to line up correctly, where to be, practice in the right way. And that might have been one of Doug's faults, to be honest. I think that's fair to say. But the wide receiver position as a whole, you talk the little access we've had to Nick Sirianni. He talks about, I think you hear this all the time. Everybody's going to play everywhere. X, Z, slot, flex. And hey, Devontae Smith might be able to do that. But the unintended consequence to that is, well, we'll use Jody's guy, Greg Ward. You want Greg Ward playing outside the numbers?
Right.
Is that even possible to have guys move around like that, or is that just coach speak in May?
It probably varies from player to player, of course. Like, I think Devontae Smith can play in the slot. He can play the Z position. X is to be determined. Rager can certainly play the Z. It'll be interesting to see if they give him opportunities in the slot. I think Fulgham showed in that, that small stretch. He played all over the formation. He played in the slot. He played on the outside. But yeah, there are certain guys that are, slot guys only and outside guys only, or they're, they're better suited to one position or another. Like we saw Nelson Aguilar struggle on the outside here, and then when they moved him into the slot, he was outstanding. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to say that, and it's nice to hope that your receivers can play every position at the wide receiver spot, but that's not always the reality. You have to have, certain player. You have to have really talented players who are able to do that, and they don't have that right now, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see if they have a couple of guys who step up to become that, but they've got to certainly prove it on the field. All right, speaking of depth in positions, and that's what Jimmy's last article on Philly Boys was about, and catching the football, the tight end position.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Zach Ertz still here. I know we're a week before June 1st, and then there's a really good chance for that to change itself, but as of this moment, Zach Ertz is still here, so I don't even know whether to count him as part of the tight end mix for the Birds. Let's assume for today's conversation he's not. The Eagles have near enough as far as getting through an entire season at tight end in your book, Jimmy K?
Well, first, to start with the Zach Ertz discussion, I would rank it like this. 1, he gets traded for some minimal compensation, like 6th, 7th round or the equivalent. 2, they release him outright. 3, they get decent compensation. We'll call that like a 4th round pick or higher. And then 4, finally, that they just keep him. I think that's the least likely scenario. So you're right. Like, they don't have much in the way of depth there. Certainly Dallas Goedert is, when he's healthy and when he's on the field, he's a complete tight end. He can catch the football. He can run after the catch. He can block. He can pass protect. He's everything anyway, but he hasn't really broken out yet. So while I think he's kind of safely in like the top 10 tight ends in the NFL, I think we're kind of expecting more out of him. But then beyond him, they don't have anything. Like, it's just a lot of guys that are either fringe roster guys or sort of lottery ticket guys like Hakeem Butler or like a Tyree Jackson who they're converting from quarterback. So they don't really have much there at all. Richard Rodgers is still out there. I would imagine at some point they might bring him back or a similar type of veteran. But yeah, it's a very not very deep position. And we've gotten sort of accustomed to the Eagles having those two tight ends in Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. And as of right now, they don't really have that.
Well, Jimmy, speaking of you did the defense today. You did the offense, I think, yesterday.
Yeah.
Your depth pieces on phillyboys.com. Did you come down on the line of the lines, the offensive line, defensive line? That's where this team has some depth. Is that fair to say? Oh,
for sure. So I would say that at the skill positions, they're not deep. Like a quarterback, running back, they're reasonably deep. But quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, not deep. Linebacker, cornerback, safety, scary, not deep. But offensive line and defensive line, I think they're in good shape. Obviously, the signing of Ryan Kerrigan gives them a foursome rotation of Graham, Kerrigan, Sweat, Barnett. And then at the defensive tackle position, normally they dumped a lot of money into, their talent there with Malik Jackson and Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox. And they're still paying Cox and Hargrave a lot. But now they hadn't drafted actually a defensive tackle during since Howie Roseman's second stint as the general manager. They've only drafted one prior to the season. That was Elijah Qualls, 6th round, 2017. Mm-hmm. They take 2 in this draft, and Milton Williams in the 3rd round, Marlon Tuipulotu in the 6th round. So they'll be relying on those guys to play immediately. Like if you look at their history of rookie defensive tackles playing early, they've had some undrafted guys that got playing time as rookies. So those 2 guys are going to play right away. And then on the offensive line, I think they're really deep. There's a lot of ifs with that offensive line, particularly with the starters. If is Lane Johnson's ankle going to hold up this season? Is Brandon Brooks going to be able to recover from his second Achilles tear the way he did on the first one? Jason Kelsey's getting up there in age. Is he going to maintain his level of play? Isaac Seumalo, sort of under the radar, has been he's been banged up here and there along the line. Jordan Mailata had 2 seasons end because of back injury. So we got to see if we can hold up. We got to see who's going to win that competition, first of all, too, between him and Andre Dillard. So, there are a lot of ifs. And then even on the backup front, like you got Landon Dickerson, of course, who has 4 major injuries throughout his college career. He's now coming in and potentially playing a reasonably important role as that first guy off the bench. And there are questions whether Holden will be ready for the start of the season. But it's a good offense. It's a really good starting offensive line. Like there aren't many teams that the Eagles would trade places with along their offensive line. And then they have depth in guys like Dickerson and whoever doesn't win the left tackle starting job, and Jack Driscoll. And we saw a little bit from Nate Herbig last year. So they do have some guys that can kind of fill in and a good starting rotation. So yeah, I'd say the lines, which is where you want to be deep, more so than the other spots, they're in good shape there, but everywhere else, not so much.
Let me ask you to go a little further on 2 guys that you just mentioned toward the end there. Both who got a chance to step in last year because of the injuries on the Eagles' offensive line. Everybody's hoping Lane Johnson, healthy, stays on the field, plays to a Pro Bowl level. Yes. Brandon Brooks stays healthy, stays on the field, plays to a Pro Bowl level. Yes. Well, neither one of those things happened last year.
Right.
If that happens again this year, Driscoll and Herbig were 2 guys who I was actually pretty pleased with and surprised that they were able to play to the level that they did. They didn't make you forget Lane Johnson or Brandon Brooks, but they did their job, and they were competent for guys with as little inexperience as they had in the league. Which one is further along? Which one is more likely to step in and kick his game up even or another notch this year if that's necessary?
So I think Herbig's ceiling is probably a little bit more limited than a guy like Driscoll. He just doesn't possess the same kind of like athleticism that Jack Driscoll does. So I think he just kind of is what he is. But last year he filled in at, multiple spots along the line, left guard, right guard. So he has that, left-right versatility, which is nice. Some guys can't do that. He could. Jack Driscoll, I thought I thought he filled in reasonably well for Lane Johnson, especially for a rookie. He had some injury problems too. Like he came out of a bunch of games like mid-game. So I think that's a concern for him going forward, but he wasn't very, I actually took a deeper look at his season specifically earlier this year, and not impressive in the run game. He's not going to blow guys off the line of scrimmage, but in pass protection, which is what you're going to prioritize at that spot anyway, I thought he did a very good job as a rookie, going to get up against some premium pass rushing talent too. So I would say that from a long-term perspective, I think that Jack Driscoll is the more appealing player than Herbig. But both guys for the 2021 season specifically, I think they're both. I think that they both proved a little bit last year that they can fill in and be quality depth should one of those guys go down.
Speaking of pass protection, Jimmy, I want to talk to you about left tackle.
Yep.
And do you get the same kind of blowback that I get when I say Andre Dillard might win this job? Don't give up on Andre Dillard. I think people forget if you rewind to 2019, there were some serious issues at left tackle, especially with the bull rush, Everson Griffin, Robert Quinn, but he was getting better. Where it really fell apart is moving over to right tackle. And I think the team was upset that he didn't fight through that. But nonetheless, he was starting to improve at left tackle. He's a natural left tackle. He's a great natural pass protector. But man, I get killed when I say anything badly about Jordan Mailata, who I love.
Yeah.
But technique-wise, there's still a lot of issues there.
Yeah, Mailata, I looked at all the Eagles, I looked at all the Eagles sacks during the 2020 season and determined that Mailata gave up more sacks than anyone on the team. I think it was 8 or 9 that he gave up on the season. So, yeah, I mean, he's not a star player by any stretch, but I think he showed some promise last year. And obviously with his size and his athleticism, I think that's what has people excited. As you mentioned with Dillard, even before he moved out to right tackle, like the week, you and I were in the locker room, of course, that week leading up to the game where he was going to start at right tackle, he seemed to think like it wasn't going to go well. So it was already sort of a preconceived notion in his mind that he was not going to play well against the Seahawks that day. And they just basically bulldozed them for the entirety of the first half. They got him out of there. And I think it was Matt Pryor that they even put in. And like you're getting benched for Matt Pryor at right tackle, no less. That's not good. So he had a few bad games, as you mentioned, early in that year at left tackle, particularly against the Vikings when he faced, the basically two different kinds of skill sets in Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin. Had another bad game against, I believe it was the Cowboys. Not Alden Smith, the guy that
Robert
Quinn ate him up a little bit. And then he was better against, I believe it was the Bills and the Bears. He still gave up sacks in each of those games, but those games didn't get out of control from the Eagles' perspective. Like the Eagles fell behind early in those Cowboys and Vikings games. So, opposing pass rushers just kind of like pinning their ears back and coming at him. So that was a bad situation for him to be in. They won each of the Bears and Bills games. So it wasn't like they were playing from behind, and they were able to protect him a little bit better in that game. But I did not feel great at all about his rookie season. His athleticism is really appealing, and that's why they took him, obviously, where they did. That's why they traded up for him. He's got great feet. He's got, he's got everything you want from an athletic standpoint. It's just, as you mentioned, can he anchor against bull rushes? And where's his mentality? Like, is he going to be able to make it in this city, or is he better off playing in a market that's not so, kind of in your face is the kind of way I'll put it. So, yeah, I mean, that'll be obviously Mailata versus Dillard is going to be the premier, obvious best training camp battle that we watch this offseason.
One last offensive line question for me, Jimmy. And it's a hypothetical question, and it may never come to fruition, but I love hypothetical questions. Let's say both Mailata and Dillard have questions in camp that Ryan Kerrigan is making both look bad from time to time.
Probably going to happen.
Which he will do.
Right.
Yes.
And first game of the preseason, both of them have some issues with whoever is playing across the field from them. What's the over-under date on the whispers of the return of future Hall of Famer, left tackle of the Philadelphia Eagles, with a very good, tight relationship with the owner, Jason Peters, one more time?
Yeah, I mean, this time last year, I thought it was probable that they were going to bring him back just as sort of like insurance for Andre Dillard. And then when Brandon Brooks went down, they signed him to be the right guard. We all know the story. Anyway, I think it's very unlikely that they'll bring him back this year, but I wouldn't put it at 0% because I just never trust that they can give up on players that they're familiar with, because they, on the quote unquote, no new ideas, idea that they keep bringing back these guys with which they know, whatever. But yeah, you're absolutely right that during training camp, there's going to be moments where, Mailata and Dillard are getting smoked by guys like, Brandon Graham and Ryan Kerrigan. So there's going to be
Osman. We're going to have Joe
Osman owns Jordan Mailata in training camp. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be some iffy moments for sure. It'll be, I mean, that battle is going to be really interesting to watch. Like, personally, I think Mailata's like, even though we mentioned that, he gave up more sacks than anyone on the team last year, I think he's actually the better football player right now than Dillard, and maybe even has sort of a higher ceiling because of his size and his athleticism, whereas Dillard kind of only has the athleticism. But I guess the one thing that Dillard has going for him is that he's a first-round pick, and Howie Roseman is not going to want to see him fail horribly on this team. So I think he's going to sort of have that, Howie bump. And as we learned during Nick Sirianni's initial press conference, he does not have control over the 53-man roster.
No.
May not even have control over the 46-man roster on game day.
No.
So, I mean, it's not going to be really his decision as much. It's going to be Howie's on who makes the team and possibly even who starts.
By the way, Jimmy, I don't think he knows right now still if he has control.
Yeah, right. He didn't know during his press conference whether he was going to set the roster on game day.
He did not, which is a pretty good indication he doesn't. He's not going to have that power.
It's almost like, I forgot to ask about that during my interview.
But I do. By the way, you bring up a good point. I don't think as many people have talked about that. Jordan is 6'8", 350, and he's got back problems.
Yes.
I mean, that concerns me a little bit. So you got to throw that into the mix as well. But I do want to shift to the defensive side. You talked a little bit about the defensive line, but that back seven, man.
Oof.
I mean, what do you do? At linebacker, I say throw Davion Taylor the deep end of the pool. At least he's athletic. See if he can play. You agree with that?
Yeah, I've been meaning to take a look at his season last year. I didn't play a lot. He didn't play a lot of snaps, obviously. I know that there's one game where he played a decent number of snaps, and my understanding is that it went pretty badly.
Yeah.
Sean Bradley's another guy that you could maybe throw in that mix where Sean Bradley played more than Davion Taylor did in the regular defense anyway. So yeah, I mean those guys and Jacoby Stevens, those three guys drafted the last 2 years, they're all lottery tickets to me. And you don't want your third round pick linebacker to be to be classified as that, but that's sort of what he is right now. He's a lottery ticket. Like, he's not a guy that you can really count on to be a starter now or anytime soon. And maybe he makes a big leap and he was a really interesting case, Davion Taylor, obviously, because he wasn't allowed to play high school football because of his religious beliefs. And then in college, he only played like 2 years at the D1 level. So I mean, that's going to be an interesting situation to see if any of those three guys, Stevens, Taylor, or Bradley, can emerge. But you look at like the three guys, I think like TJ Edwards is good in his, I think he's a quality player in his role as sort of a 2-down linebacker on those rundowns. But, you're not going to have him on the field much in those obvious passing situations. Eric Wilson is a guy that they hope will be a competent starter. And then, Alex Singleton racked up a ton of tackles and was certainly an upgrade over Nate Gary, but kind of want to see a little more of a library of work for him before, we sort of rubber stamp him as a quality, 3-down linebacker. But not a lot of depth there, obviously, either a linebacker, corner, or safety. I think they're in big trouble. I mean, as is just on the starting lineup, but beyond that, even if a guy goes down, then they're substantially worse as well.
Real quick follow up there. How much have you looked at Eric Wilson? I see a guy who's a 20-point scorer on a bad NBA team. Like, he made some plays.
Yeah.
But the Vikings defense just fell apart
because
of injuries and free agent losses. He made plays, but it wasn't good.
Yeah, I can see that. He gives you, in theory, what we think the Eagles are going to be looking for in the linebacker position under Jonathan Gannon, disciple of Mike Zimmer, of course. They want guys, I think, who can, rush the passer a little bit, whereas that was not a priority under Jim Schwartz. Who can, obviously play the run and be in coverage. And you want that from every linebacker, obviously. But, he gives you a little element of each of those things. I don't think he's spectacular at any one of them. And I think you're right. I think you racked up a lot of stats because they had a lot of injuries on that defense, and he was just put in a position where he could rack up a lot of stats. But I'm not sold on him as a quality starter either.
Let me further John's basketball analogy here for another Eagle linebacker, the 20-point a game on the bad NBA.
Yes.
Let me describe Genard Avery as a 20-point in an NBA preseason game, who, when he actually got to play in a regular season game, instead scored 4 points. So what do? He's a small forward. Let's try him out at guard. Let's change his position and think that's going to get him back to the 20 points that he got in the preseason game. This guy never flashed on tape for me, at least since he was in an Eagle uniform. And again, we're back into the question of who's going to really make the decision on how this guy is used, if he's used. Is it going to be the new coaching staff, or is it going to be the general manager who traded for him, didn't pick him up off the scrap heap, actually gave up a draft pick to get him, and the guy's done pretty much nothing since he became a Philadelphia Eagle? What does the future hold, specifically this year, 2021, for Mr. Avery?
That is as baffling a trade as Howie Roseman's made in his tenure. And it's not that big a deal because they gave up a 4th-round pick, which it's not, it's a decent pick. Like, it's not a premium pick, but it's a pick you want to have, clearly. And the timing of the trade is what really gets me. They traded for him at the 2019 deadline, which is when it's probably the biggest seller's market as you're going to get in terms of trade compensation. Like, that's when you see trades that are highly favoring the team that's trading the player away for a draft pick at the trade deadline. And the reasoning for the trade that Howie Roseman gave at the end of that season wasn't the same as when they made the trade for Golden Tate in 2018, and that they needed someone immediately to step into the lineup and produce. They traded him because he had 2 years left on his contract, after the end of that season. He was only in the second year of his contract, so they had 2 full years thereafter, and he was going to be a guy that they develop off during the off season and get him up to speed, and then he can play a role in the defense going forward. Okay, well, why not trade for him during the off season? But then also the compensation of a 4th-round pick didn't make any sense because I think the Browns drafted him in the 5th round, I believe, and he hadn't done much for them. He was basically inactive most weeks during that season, and you're going to give him a better pick than what they took him at? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Then you're right, Jody. Like, he really hasn't done anything in this in this defense so far. The one thing I will note about him is I do wonder if the Eagles are going to, play sort of like a hybrid, show sort of like a hybrid defensive scheme, like a 4-3 under that sort of has some, 3-4 principles in it. And we got some hints of that in that, they signed Ryan Kerrigan, who could potentially play that kind of Anthony Barr-like role. They drafted a guy in Patrick Johnson. You don't want to make too much of a guy they took in the 7th round, but he's a guy that would sort of fit that role. Genard Avery is a guy that sort of maybe can fit that role. As when they moved him from defensive end to linebacker. So, maybe there are some clues in Avery and Johnson and Kerrigan that they are going to play sort of that 4-3 under defense.
Yeah, that to me is a positive, and I think that might be Kerrigan's role. And then you do have the Averys and the Patrick Johnsons, even the Osmans as sort of that stand-up rusher. So I think you might be right about that. Now we got a real quick last thing while we have you, Jimmy. We got to talk about the cornerback position. I mean, what is this team doing? Josiah Scott. I mean, he looks like physically he's a clone of Babante Mack. Same size, same speed, same everything. They could be the same player. Babante played outside at Pitt, though, so he's a little bit more comfortable, I think, playing outside the numbers, although you probably didn't see that last year.
Yeah.
Zach McPherson, I think, is a slot corner. I mean, I think they'll be fine in the slot, but who the heck is going to play opposite Darius Slay?
Yeah, I don't think they solved that position yet. I think they're probably still going to sign someone to play. They'll just slap a Band-Aid on that CB2 spot. But it's funny you mentioned Avonte Maddox on the comp for Josiah Scott because when you look up, you Google like Josiah Scott, scouting report, you find like Lance Zierlein of NFL Network. He writes a scouting report for almost every prospect leading up to every draft, and his player comp in, I guess, what was he drafted? 2020, Josiah Scott?
2020, yeah.
his player comp was Avonte Maddox.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. Like he does sort of fit that same, play style and size and athleticism and all as Avonte Maddox. And I get it. Like I get it adding a guy like that because you let Nickel Roby-Coleman might be out of the league now. He had a disastrous season, but Crayvon LeBlanc, they haven't brought him back, so they do need more depth at that slot corner spot. But how much depth do you need there when you don't have that outside corner spot fixed yet? So, yeah, I don't know why you'd give up a pick for a guy like that. It feels like, backup slot cornerback is kind of something that you don't have to give up a pick to get, but that's what they did. And, that cornerback spot, you have Darius Slay obviously will start at one spot. Avonte Maddox was clearly not capable of playing on the outside with his size last year. Zach McPherson asking him to, play immediately as a rookie is, if he can do it, great, but you can't count on that from a 4th round pick. So we'll see what he can do, whether he plays outside, inside, a combination of the two, who knows? But yeah, it's as troublesome a spot on their roster as you'll find, and on a roster that's not good from top to bottom to begin with.
And Jimmy, last thing, we've had you for half an hour now, and we talked about the defense and the offense, and not once have we mentioned the quarterback. Which doesn't much happen anytime you talk about any NFL team, and certainly not the Philadelphia Eagles, who are going with a relatively new quarterback. Yeah, he started 4 games at the end of last year, but Jalen Hurts is going to get his chance to prove he's a full-time franchise quarterback in the NFL. And John used the term clean slate earlier in the show. He gets a clean slate. New coaching staff gets a clean slate. Maybe the likes of Quez Watkins and Hightower and a bunch of the wide receivers who didn't quite get that 600 yards last year all get a clean slate. Are they going to be able to make the most of it? Is the leadership role that we believe that Hurts can have with this team going to work with this new clean slate?
Yeah, well, the big thing that Nick Sirianni just hammered into us all throughout his initial press conferences was that he was adaptable in Indianapolis, where they had, Andrew Luck starting one year. The next year they had Jacoby Brissett. The next year they had Phillip Rivers. So 3 different skill sets from 3 different kinds of quarterbacks, and they adapted the offense to fit, their strengths. And the challenge for him is going to be able to fit the strengths of Jalen Hurts. And the strengths of Jalen Hurts are his intangibles. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders. I think he's competitive. I think he's going to, give them everything that they want from the off-field, perspective. But on the field, he's outstanding as a runner. Like, in my opinion, you have Lamar Jackson, and then after Lamar Jackson, he is the most skilled running quarterback in the NFL. Can he throw the football? He couldn't throw it that well in his small sample size in 2020. You look at his 52% completion percentage, which, on paper, you can sort of make the leap and say, okay, he wasn't accurate. And, you can make excuses for that. He threw a lot of balls away. His receivers weren't good, blah, 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 blah. Actually look at the passes that he threw. Yeah, he missed a lot of makeable passes in the 4 games that he played. So I think the accuracy issues are very much legit. His arm strength, I don't think it's a positive. I don't think it's a negative. I think it's fine. But the accuracy really is something that has to improve substantially from last year to this year if he's going to have any chance of holding down this starting job beyond 2021. And there's reason to believe he can. So in college, he was inaccurate, very early in his career, and it got better each year as he went along. So we'll see if he can continue that trend in the pros. But again, that'll be sort of the defining thing on his 2021 season and whether he can lock down that job, going forward.
Jimmy, great stuff. We kept you a long time. We appreciate you hanging with us, buddy. Maybe I'll see you at the Wawa later. I don't know. The Malton Mafia reigns here in town. Thanks for coming on with the Mac and Mac guys today. We'll talk to you again soon, big guy.
All right, man. Let's get a beer soon in Marlton.
Done deal. That is Jimmy Kempski.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.